I want to give consultancy owners a little bit of a warning about private equity and when one should and shouldn't go to private equity. The first thing I would say is that private equity is a fairly recent entrant into investment in the professional services market. Really, over the last 15 years, the percentage share of private equity in terms of investment versus a private strategic buyer or a trade buyer, potentially backed by private equity, has grown from sort of 5% to 50%. And that's part of the function because they've just got so much cash, which is partly a function of the cost of capital up until recently. But it's partly the fact that professional services typically are a cash rich business and offer decent returns for private equity. So they've shifted slightly their strategies from product into people, and that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned, and a sensible thing that I would have been recommending if I was on any of their boards. The key thing from a firm perspective, if you run a boutique consulting firm, there are key things is that private equity is much more of a risk than a strategic or trade buyer. There's potentially much greater reward because you're keeping a much bigger part of the pie than if you sell early to a trade buyer. So if you believe in your firm and you're not sick of it and you're enjoying what you're doing, then why would you sell to a trade buyer or a strategic buyer? I use those terms interchangeably just in case you think they're something different to each other. And instead, you could bet on your firm. So typically, say a £10 million professional service firm, management consultancy, fairly traditional one with all the weaknesses that a 30-person firm might have or a 50-person firm might have, you'd be talking about a multiple of 7 of EBITDA. If you can get that up to, 50 or 100 million, you might be talking an EBITDA of a multiple of 9 or even 10 times EBITDA. So you get a bigger return the bigger your company is. So if you can, invest, pull the right levers, and all the rest of it, private equity can make sense. Now, here's the thing. I've been studying and working with management consultancies for 23 years now, and I still haven't worked out which private equity firms are better than others. I've seen some private equity deals from the same firm go very badly, and some private equity deals go very well. And that doesn't seem to be down to the economics of the firm. It very often seems to be down to the relationship and the wisdom of whoever is representing the private equity firm and managing the relationship with the consulting firm. There's a huge amount of variability there. In a different life, I'd like to set up almost a star rating for individuals that work in private equity firms because there's such a huge amount of variance. So number one, luck needs to be on your side. The second thing to mention is that typically you shouldn't go, this is in my view, you shouldn't go for private equity unless you know what your firm is about. Once you know what your firm is about, you know your value proposition, you know your target buyers, you know you've got a clear set of services that are growing. Once you know what your firm is about, once it's settled, you're kind of out of the growth phase. The growth phase is working out, what you are about as a firm. You get to the end of the growth phase when you know which levers to invest in order to generate sales. Because typically in a firm that knows what it's about, it's at the beginning of the scaling journey, it's going to have one or two key chokeholds on its growth. Now that might be getting great people, it might be getting great senior people, it might be the systems at the back end to allow it to grow because there's just too much information and the founders getting involved in every decision. It might be that there is no decent strategic board. It might be the marketing machine, or it could be the sales machine. So once you identify which one of those or two of those are your big problem, and that you need investment from the outside to cure those, if you can, you should always grow from cash flow up until that stage. Once you're at that stage, it's perfectly feasible to borrow, not necessarily from private equity, but from the cheapest source, to invest in those areas so that you can scale your firm. And that's really what scaling is. It's investing in the 2 or 3 levers that have been choking growth or not enabling growth in your firm. So I certainly wouldn't go for private equity until that. But even if you do decide to go for private equity, you need to go in with your eyes wide open. Private equity will typically require some form of representation on the board and obviously some equity for their investment, and therefore typically some type of say in decision making, which means the representative of the private equity firm really needs to be on board with, and really needs to have that trusted relationship with the CEO and the rest of the seniors in the firm. Typically, I would never go to private equity just for the money. They should be bringing something else to the table. So they should either be, could be part of a roll up, connecting you with other partners. It could be them bringing you clients. It could be them providing you with great advice. They should be bringing something else other than the simple cash. Now, the cash is very important, don't get me wrong, but ideally the PE firm that you select should be bringing something else, something significant to the table that's going to allow you to grow. You also need to be very aware of the fact that, should you not meet the target that private equity want you to meet, typically they'll have some form, or often they'll have some form of clause that allows them to get more equity, more of a say, more of a control in the firm. And it's then that things can start to get a little bit touchy with the owner, especially if the private equity then starts to own more of the firm than the owner does, or the owners do. So private equity is really something that you need to think very carefully about. It can work in very specific circumstances when the relationship is right, when you know what the levers are, that you finish your growth phase and you're kind of starting your scale phase, and where you can't borrow the money at the bank at sufficient interest rates or sufficient amounts. If you're going to bet on the future of your firm, which you might, there's nothing wrong with not doing that, because you might be at the stage that you want to retire, you've simply had enough of it, then private equity can afford great opportunities. But you've really got to be careful, because I've seen a lot more private equity deals fail than I have strategic or trade buyer deals. Something to be aware of. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.